This is the Farming for a Better Climate podcast.
Hello and welcome to this Farming for a Better Climate podcast. My name is Ian Boyd, and on today's episode we have a conversation between beef and sheep specialist Kirsten Williams and Nicola Lambe, a sheep production and genetics researcher at SRUC. This podcast is the second of a three-part series looking at improving efficiencies in sheep systems. The first looks at health, this one focuses on genetics, and the third looks at nutrition. And now over to Kirsten.
So Nicola, we know there's three greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane. Methane is probably more of an issue for livestock farmers. So there's more pressure on us to reduce our methane emissions, largely because they're emitted through ruminant digestion and storage of manure. But it's really where the spotlight is. So it'd be good to speak more about methane today. But I guess where the interesting thing is with the Scottish system is that we've got such different types of sheep production systems between hill down to lowland, and what those animals are fed, the feed quality, there's so many differences, and the different breeds that we have there as well. So talking about methane then, how does somebody go about or understanding how to measure methane emissions with their flock?
Yeah, well, a lot of the early research looking at measuring methane was done in indoor systems because that's a lot easier, and most of it was done on cattle in respiration chambers. So you would take individual cows, put them into respiration chambers, which is a kind of sealed box, and they would be in there for a few days. But it's a very kind of expensive way to measure it, and you can do very low numbers. So they've done similar things with sheep in respiration chambers, and that's still really the gold standard. But now we have this new technology which was developed in Australia and New Zealand called portable accumulation chambers. So they're much smaller little chambers that we can put individual sheep into. And you can get 12 of these little boxes on the back of a trailer that can be towed behind a truck and go to different farms. And the sheep only stay in these portable accumulation chambers for 50 minutes, and it gives a really accurate measurement of the total amount of methane that they produce over a few days when you measure it in a respiration chamber. So that's a lot more relevant for sheep production in particular, because most of the sheep, particularly in the UK, are kept outdoors and are on grazing. So it's a way of taking them off the diet that they've been accustomed to and measuring their methane at that point in time. And that gives a good reflection of the measurements that are taken in these more kind of gold standard respiration chambers.
So when you speak about the methane chambers for cattle, I think a lot of people will know them probably as the Green Cow facility that we've got in the SRUC farm at Edinburgh. And that is obviously, it's a whole building for that facility. And when cattle go through those chambers, they have to be trained first so that they know how to get into the feeder and everything else. And I guess for sheep, being that it's a portable accumulation chamber, you can just drive into the field, load the sheep up, and it's nice and quick. How does the preparation go for that? Do the sheep have to come off of the diet they're on a couple of hours before? Do they have to have an empty rumen? How does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of the initial research on this to work out the best protocols was done in Australia and New Zealand, and they found that if the animals are off feed for an hour before they're measured, you get the most stable readings. So we usually try and keep them off feed for between 1 and a maximum of 6 hours when we record our different batches. So usually the animals would be taken off the field. So they've just been grazing on the same grass 2 or 3 weeks before the measurements are taken. They would then be taken off that grass an hour before the first measurements start, and they'll be sorted into their different batches of 12 that will be recorded on the first morning. And then once they've been off for an hour, the first group of 12 would go into the chambers for recording. So the beauty is that because most of the animals in the UK in particular are grazed outdoors, they're coming off that diet that's really representative of what they would usually be eating, and you're measuring the methane that's been produced from digesting that grass diet.
And how do the chambers actually work then? So the sheep go into it, they're in there for 50 minutes. What is happening while they're in there?
So very little. As you say, they go into the chamber. It's a sealed box, so the door's closed, and we take a measurement when they go in at first of the base levels. So the methane will be 0, the carbon dioxide will be 0, and we also measure oxygen, which is around 20-21%. And then the animals, they usually just lie down and chew the cud and ruminate. And we take another measurement at 25 minutes, and then a final measurement at 50 minutes. And you can see over that period of time, the methane goes up slightly, the carbon dioxide goes up slightly, and that replaces the oxygen in the sealed unit. But we keep very close eye on the levels of those gases across the time, and we know that it's all within safe limits for the animals.
And I saw these units, the portable accumulation chamber came up for an open day up in the northeast, and farmers found it just really quite amazing that it was 12 units on a trailer that could be moved about. And I think it's a fantastic, real innovative way to try and understand these emissions from the different types of sheep systems a bit more. It'd be interesting to hear from you though, like what are you using it for? What kind of projects are you doing with them at the moment?
Yeah, so the first project that we had when we got the chambers, we took them down to a farm in Hertfordshire, Rob Hodgkins, who has some New Zealand Romneys down there, and he's part of the SIL breeding program in New Zealand. So some of the related animals from his flock had been measured using similar pack chambers in New Zealand. So we took our pack chambers down there and really just to test, could we measure variation in the amount of methane in his flock. So they'd all been on a standard diet, all managed in exactly the same way. And we measured the methane of about 120 of his lambs and saw some real variation across the flock. So that was a sort of small feasibility project to see if we could take similar measurements to what they were taking in New Zealand and feed the data into that breeding program as well. And then we've started a new project called Breed for Change. So it's an Innovate UK funded project, and it's an industry-led project with Innovis as the main partner, and a number of other maternal breeding groups involved in that as well. So there's the performance recorded Clins, the Exlanas, Centurion Dorsets, and they're measuring, I think it's going to be 13,000 sheep through the pack chambers over 3 years. And the aim is to look at how we could incorporate that into a breeding program for these maternal breeds within the UK, and measuring lots of other production and health traits across the 3 years as well to look at the genetic relationships with those traits. So that's underway at the moment. Innovis are busy. They have their own set of pack chambers that they're going around farms with and measuring a lot of sheep over this autumn. And then the other project that we're using them on at the moment, the SRUC chambers, is the Scottish Government funded hill sheep breeding project that we've got running at our SRUC's Hill and Mountain Research Centre. So we've had a long-term project looking at breeding hill sheep and genetic selection for maternal traits, lamb production traits, and health traits. And we're trying to add in some of these new sustainability traits and looking at environmental impact and feed efficiency. So last week and next week, we're recording the hill lambs through the pack chambers up at the Hill and Mountain Research Centre at Kirsten. So that's Scottish Blackface lambs and also Scottish Blackface cross Clin lambs that we're recording through the chambers then.
And if you've got 12 chambers and it takes 50 minutes per cycle as such, and you've obviously got changeover time, how many sheep are you managing to get through in a day? Because 13,000 sheep, that's a lot to manage to get through.
Yeah, so we've been doing about 5 batches of 12 a day with our smaller projects. The Innovis technicians are doing 6 batches a day, so they're doing 72 lambs a day, but they're on the road pretty much all this month, all next month, and so they're going to be recording the different maternal breeds at different times of the year as well to be able to fit them in over the 3 years. But usually for the trials that we've done at the Hill and Mountain Research Centre and down south, we've done about 60 lambs a day. But again, it's quite a quick way of building up a lot of data compared to when we used to have to use respiration chambers and leave an animal in for a few days to get a measurement of their methane emissions.
And when you say you're putting through 5 batches, that's 12 per batch. So 60 sheep is actually quite a lot. And you're saying lambs, just to be specific, it's all lambs. There's no adult sheep that are going through these, is there?
We've done some hogs. So the first sheep that we measured in our chambers were Scottish Blackface hogs that were just over a year old. And they've been fine. In Ireland, they've got the same chambers and they do a lot of recording of adult ewes through there. So they are designed to be able to fit adult ewes as well. So over time, we'll be measuring adults as well as lambs.
And you've spoken about that you've done pretty much 3 or are handling 3 different projects. What is the initial findings? Is it too early, or what's the key messages that are coming so far?
We're definitely seeing there's a lot of data coming in already, and we're seeing some interesting findings already. A lot of it to do with the protocols and how we can fine tune our protocols. So there's definitely big differences in the measurements that we get due to environmental factors. So the diet that the animals are on, the different farms and the management in the different farms, and also that time off feed. So there's definitely a decrease in methane emissions the longer they've been off feed for, even in that window between 1 and 6 hours. But even after we've accounted for these environmental differences, we do see quite a big variation between individual animals within a flock, even when they've all been treated and managed exactly the same. And in some of the flocks that we've measured, we have identified sire differences between the lambs. So in the New Zealand Romneys that we measured down in Hertfordshire, they were across a number of sires, and we found that there was significant differences depending on the sire of the lambs. And that fits quite well with what they've found from the other groups that are using these chambers internationally, that there is genetic control of these methane emission traits as well that we could exploit within a breeding programme. So it seems to be very good at ranking animals on methane emissions, but you need to balance any treatments that you want to compare, whether that's sires or different feeds or whatever, across the batches of 12 because of those differences depending on environmental conditions when they're measured and the time off feed. So as long as you design the batches of 12 so that you've got representatives of the different sires or treatments within each batch, then you can get very good information to rank your animals on methane emissions.
And of course, the level of methane emissions from a sheep, there's so many different ways to change that, and being the level of feed they're eating, the quality of the feed they're eating, their feed conversion. Like there's so many different variables, isn't there? Which is really interesting when there's variation between flocks, but within flocks with the same management as well. And I wonder, because the kind of what we hear as lowland and upland flocks obviously have different levels of emission, typically because the lowland flock's more productive and there's more lambs, so the kilos of methane produced are spread over more. So we tend to find our lowland flocks have less emissions than our upland and hill flocks. And the kind of figures that we see is for a lowland flock about 11 kilos of carbon equivalent per live weight, in the upland and hill somewhere between 13 and 18% kilos per carbon dioxide equivalent per live weight. Is that changing much for what you're seeing? Is that kind of the ballpark figures that you guys are seeing through the chambers?
It's quite difficult to compare because the measures, the absolute values that we see from the pack chambers can't really directly compare to the respiration chambers. So as I said, it's very good for ranking animals and comparing treatments or sires, but the absolute values in terms of grams per day of methane aren't really comparable with other methods of measurement. It's a bit early to see how the upland and the lowland breeds are comparing on our pack chambers so far, but there definitely is quite big differences between farms for whatever management reasons, or could be diet or other environmental differences between the farms. But yeah, hopefully we'll get more data to be able to look at these sorts of things. But again, it would have to be in a sort of designed experiment that would let us look at that within the batches that we're measuring.
And you're speaking a lot about maternal breeds. Is there anything with terminal breeds at all currently?
We'd like to measure more of the terminal breeds. I think some of the grant funding has focused on the maternal traits because in terms of our flocks, most of the methane emissions are coming from the breeding ewes, the ewe flock that's on the farm all year round. So understanding how those methane emissions change over the lifetime of the animals is quite interesting as well. And within that Breed for Change project with Innovis, we're going to be recording the same animals, the same as ewe lambs and then hogs, and at different stages through their life to see how that changes over time. But definitely the terminal sire lambs that are produced for slaughter will be having quite a big impact on total methane emissions from our sheep systems as well. So yeah, we definitely want to record those animals through the chambers as well, and to look at relationships with carcass traits, potentially meat quality as well, which would be very interesting to see what the genetic relationships are with those sorts of traits.
I guess it's early stages, and there's so many places you can go with these, isn't there? And you can, just as you talk, I can hear you thinking of future projects as well, which is absolutely brilliant. Just now the projects that you're doing is all big. What if a smaller scale, either tup producer or a female producer, if they wanted their flock measured, is that something that would be feasible? Is it something that people can do, or is it really focusing on these big industry projects?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're hoping we'll be able to do, is just go to industry flocks and measure some of their animals. In fact, there's 2 breeders down in England that we've been and measured a couple of days worth of lambs on their farms, and they've totally self-funded that this year. The difficulty is that there's no subsidies currently for doing these measurements. So these breeders actually thought it was worthwhile to pay to get their own lambs measured, and they've done a selection across their different sire groups. The difficulty is, I suppose, that's quite a lot of money to do that without any subsidies or without any grant funded funds behind it. And you get the biggest benefits really if those results can feed into a breeding programme where related sheep are also being measured and EBVs can be produced. So those two breeders had links again to the breeding programme in New Zealand that are taking pack measurements from different breeders across New Zealand. So that could have a bigger benefit for those UK breeders because they're linking into that breeding programme as well. So they'll hopefully, although they're paying for that themselves, they'll get back useful data and potentially EBVs for methane production from the links with New Zealand flocks.
It's a great, I can see it being a great marketing tool as well, in that it's something slightly unique as well. It's another part of the story of what's happening in the sheep that the buyer generally can't see, isn't it? Which should, I guess, add value or just open up different market streams as well.
One of the unknowns is that we're not sure how policy will change in future and how subsidies may change in future to be linked to measures to reduce methane emissions or carbon footprint of a flock. But I think some of these breeders are definitely trying to be early adopters and trying to build up data on these traits so that they can market their breeding stock based on their potential methane emissions or carbon footprint.
Yeah, and it's another tool, isn't it? Because we've got flocks that are data recording, they've got growth rates, they've got lamb survival, litter size, lamb losses, health. There's loads of different tools that people are using to show that actually they're a highly productive sheep. It's just having that additional tool in the toolkit, I guess.
Yeah.
Now we've spoken there about the variation between different sheep and even sheep within a flock being on the same diet, the same genetics, and still breeding differently. How do you think we can breed a low methane sheep with selected genetics?
Yes, I think it's definitely possible from the work that's been done in other countries. They've measured enough animals that they now have quite a good handle on the heritability of these traits. So methane emissions measured in the packs is about 30% heritable, so similar sort of level of heritability as growth and carcass traits. So there is a lot of scope to be able to change methane emissions just by selective breeding. One thing I would say that all has to be taken in context of the other traits that you were talking about there, Kirsten. So the production traits, the health traits, maternal traits, and all the improved genetics that we've got within the UK that we've been breeding for these other traits over decades. We don't want to throw away all that and turn our back on productivity and just look at methane. But in New Zealand, what they've done is look at some of these genetic relationships and see, well, could we include methane in the selection index and still make genetic gain across the generations and all these other production and health traits that we've been selecting on over the years. And it seems that it is possible to have that kind of win-win situation to be able to make genetic gains in those production and maternal traits at the same time as slowly reducing your methane emissions by selective breeding as well. So yeah, I think it's a definite possibility. It has to be done properly. It has to be done within a bigger breeding program that's looking at all our traits of interest. And like you say, it's just another tool, another breeding value that we have to balance with all the others that we're interested in.
And you were saying there about the New Zealand system and how kind of further down the line, I guess, that New Zealand is compared to us. Have you been out there to see the differences that that's made at all?
Not for a few years, but I'm always willing to go for another visit. But we've been working with some of the people from New Zealand that are involved in these trials on international research projects. So we have had a lot of discussions, and so we bought the pack chambers from New Zealand, and they've sent us their protocols and videos of working over there. We've also been to Ireland to get trained in how to use the pack chambers, because they have the same chambers there, and they've had them up and running for a couple of years, going round farms within their breeding programs to measure methane emissions. So yeah, I think we've had a lot of benefits from working with these other international groups that have more experience than us, and even just pulling together all our data from across the different countries. I think that will give us a much more powerful base to make decisions on, and to learn how to use the data in our breeding programs.
And it's interesting to hear that Ireland are using it as well, because their sheep system's probably not as complicated as ours in having the hill, the upland and lowland. So that'll add a real strength, having your Scottish Government, your hill sheep breeding project, where you're really getting West Coast true hill sheep into that data set as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're looking at trying to reduce emissions from livestock, and specifically sheep, within this podcast. And just to round it off, Nicola, I'm going to throw something at you, and it'll be really interesting to see where you come from this, really as a geneticist as well. But looking forward, if we can have the ultimate sheep of the future, and she's going to be a net zero sheep, what three attributes would you like our net zero sheep of the future to have?
Well, I think first of all, they have to be productive and efficient. And that's the same message, I suppose, that we've had for years. So that's one of the main things that's affecting their carbon footprint in the sheep flocks, is having productive ewes that are going to produce lambs every year, potentially with a smaller mature size, and lambs that are going to produce meat more efficiently and perhaps be slaughtered earlier. So that's one, although a lot of talk for one. So productive and efficient. Second, they have to be healthy. So we know that parasite resistance and being free from disease is linked to having lower methane emissions and lower carbon footprints. So productive and healthy, which is what we've been talking about for decades anyway. But then this third thing of having the knowledge about the actual methane emissions. So even those that are equal in terms of production efficiency and health, we know that there's variation amongst them that we can select for low methane production. And that's probably to do more with the rumen physiology and the microbiome of the rumen. So being able to get some handle on that as well, then we can have that all-round sheep that's going to meet these net zero targets, hopefully, or work towards them, but also fulfill all the characteristics that we need from a productive sheep that's going to provide food for the nation.
I think you cheated a little bit there with that, and that there was probably more than three attributes. You're productive and efficient does cover quite a lot, I have to
It does.
say. I think your low mature size, you're producing meat efficiently. There's so much within that, isn't there?
Yeah.
And it's finding the right mature size, I guess, for the system, because within our hill, upland, and lowland, there's no one breed that's going to actually tick boxes for everything, is there?
No, definitely not. And Yeah, I mean, we've been trying to avoid it becoming a breed competition because, like you say, in our varied environments we've got in the UK, there's different breeds that are suited to different environments and different production systems. And I think it'll be the same in terms of bringing methane into the equation, that there isn't going to be one type of sheep that are going to tick all the boxes. We'll need different types of sheep across the production systems. And within those different types of sheep, we'll choose the ones that have the lower methane emissions.
So no, we've actually covered a heap of stuff there, and understanding how the portable accumulation chambers work and the data that can give us to give us a bigger picture to what is happening. But I think one of your final points there is actually a massive point with your future sheep being productive and efficient, because really to reduce emissions, that's where we come down to. It's being productive and being efficient, reducing the waste, reducing the inputs, making most of the assets that you've got, and like improving grassland, maximising the utilisation of that, reducing inputs such as nitrogen fertilisers by having more clovers and such like in the sward. And this productive and efficiency, it is a massive place where so much more improvements can be made within the Scottish flock. Yeah. So it's been great talking to you today, Nicola. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten and Nicola, and thank you for listening to this Farming for a Better Climate podcast. For more information on the topics covered, please visit the Farming for a Better Climate website, and to listen to all of our other episodes, follow the Farming for a Better Climate podcast. We hope you'll join us again next time.